gunned down at this Ritchie Street housing complex around midnight Wednesday. Several neighbors and witnesses said they heard more than one gunshot.
It's a pain song right here.
Ill will make the beat down, seat down, seat down, seat.
I swear to God, we been through many days and cloudy days. I know we thuggin', but I swear that we was better raised. Hard circumstances mean a nigga change his ways. Man, I ain't no turning back when we in the maze. And I swear to God, yeah, my niggas like to act a fool. So far, you, man, I really go back to school. Cause my nigga pull that CB really toned on the tool. And he won't hesitate to put a pussy on the news. Swear to God, they had G-Block and he was laying in a hospital. They had AB feeling like he was responsible. Now we circle around your block like the constable. And we turn up on your ass like the carnival. And we ain't never had shit, who we had to have split. We ain't looking up to God, we looked up to the savage. Remember me and Master P was riding up in traffic. We looking for the option, trying to put them up in damage. So tell me when my own niggas start to fucking plot. I was only 18 and I done took a few shots. 3 to my fucking leg, but my body ain't dropped. And I ain't gon' stop, I just picked up the drive. Yeah, they ain't gon' take me out. Best believe I'ma make it out. Yeah, out of this vacant house. I swear to God, we been through many days and cloudy days. I know we thuggin', but I swear that we was better raised. Hard circumstances mean a nigga change his ways. But I ain't no turning back when we in the maze. And I swear to God, yeah, my niggas like to act a fool. So far, you, man, I really go back to school. Cause my nigga pull that CB really toned on the tool. And he won't hesitate to put a pussy on the news.
Married to the money, I like 50s, I like hundreds. Got a chain and ton of running, niggas ain't know how we coming. I don't like to talk a lot, my youngest come and spark a lot. Gon' catch him in the parking lot, these bullets start to cough a lot. Got a proposition, if you see the opposition, better get in your position. We them niggas that they hitting. Niggas need this and then they little nigga go missing. Run around with that Smith and I be damned to catch me slipping. My niggas don't flinch, baby blade let it 30 rounds in the clip, guaranteed to get hit. Max got that stick, make you do a whole flip. Call my nigga Allen, we do the dash in the whip. Nina on my side, but I treat her like my bitch. My fuck around, make her calm, how my fingers love to itch. Gotta separate me from some, know some niggas love to switch. Can't be fuck around me and dumb, need my mind to see me rich. I swear to God, we been through many days and cloudy days. I know we thuggin', but I swear that we was better raised. Hard circumstances mean a nigga change his ways. But I ain't no turning back when we in the maze. And I swear to God, yeah, my niggas like to act a fool. So far, you, man, I really go back to school. Cause my nigga pull that CB really toned on the tool. And he won't hesitate to put a pussy on the news.
I know some days they wanna bring you down, yeah. Don't let them bring you down. I know some eyes they misjudge you, throw shade and they hate on you, yeah. Don't let them bring you down, yeah. I know some guys that really want you. I know some girls that walk the earth and sell their souls just to be like you, yeah. That walk the earth and sell their souls just to be like you, yeah. Don't let them bring you down. Man, I made this thing for the African queens, for the strong and the vicious, for the wise and the conscious, for the broken and the bruised. We're the guardians of the future. We're the guardians of the future. Man, I made this thing for the African kings. Oh yeah. For the strong and the vicious, for the wise and the conscious, for the broken and the bruised. We're the guardians of the future. We're the guardians of the future. Don't let them bring you down. Don't Don't let them bring you down. Don't lay yourself down. This part's for me, I know somehow. Hey, the world keeps crashing, the future seems frightening. Don't let that slow you down. I know the fire, hey, that's burning within you, the flame that continues no matter the issue. Don't let them burn it out. Don't let them burn it out. You see, I got here because of the village, right? Yeah, well, you know, the parents, siblings, cousins. Everybody pitched in to get the kid here. It really does take a village, oh yeah. So first and foremost, I really want to thank, well, y'all know where this is going, right? Listen, I want to thank some people that joined the village. Like Brian did a lot of concert, and John did a lot of strumming. Talking through it, did a lot of talking. Paul made a deal, so it saw a lot of growth. Star did too, man, this boy's really hungry. And Kara, my dear, well, you got my ear. Oh yeah, I'm calling this one village. I do this for my village. Yeah, Karangazi Murao, Karangazi Murao, Karangazi Murao.
In the streets, some say we only want justice, some say we only want peace. Our people dying for nothing, the population decrease. I'm able to see that justice just a fable to me. There's more divine to this life, son, so take it from me. And homie, this my only life, you'll never take it from me. So why Trayvon had to die just to make us to see America, now switch streak haze with the sea. This a melting pot, but the only flavor to me. I'm craving to be black is worth saving than me. I walk the roads that my ancestors paving for me, and so I know it's only greatness that is waiting for me. If you know your enemy, you gotta know yourself. Gotta educate our youth, can't depend on no one else. If I'm trying to tell the truth, then that's risky for my health. I was born a black king, so that did that by itself.
Fuck 12, fuck 12, for real, for real. Fuck 12. Fuck 12, for real, for real. Fuck 12, fuck 12, for real, for real. Fuck 12, fuck 12, for real. Fuck 12, fuck 12, for real, for real. Fuck 12, fuck 12, for real, for real. Fuck 12, fuck 12, for real, for real. Fuck 12. I
said I'm running from the cops, and I've been running all my life. I never settled with commitment. You either suspect or witness in my greatness. But I'm caught in the matrix. Any day they gon' come take me away. Got my money in the basement. I don't say shit. Make it back in the day. Got me thinking about back in the day. If you acting away, just know I ain't backing away. Better back up. Yeah, better call back up. What you mean put my hands up? Guns drawn like Picasso. Yo, I don't got a master. Got a PhD in disaster. So that ain't for the heart of the king. I just wanna sing. I just wanna see everything. I wanna be everything. I wanna travel lands, get bands, make plans, plant seeds in the spring. I wanna grow like that. Why you wanna stomp on the floor like that? Put my head to the floor like that.
Fuck 12, for real, for real. Fuck 12, fuck 12, for real, for real. Fuck 12, fuck 12, for real, for real. Fuck 12, fuck 12, for real. Fuck 12, fuck 12, for real, for real. Fuck 12, fuck 12, for real, for real. Fuck 12, fuck 12, for real, for real. Fuck 12.
How come police aren't patrolling the Islamic Care Center on Somerset when she's had 2 hate crimes committed against her temple in 1 week? When I know they roll around downtown frequently, why do the cops barely make a stop at the abortion clinic on Bank Street when the staff and the service users and their companions are constantly attacked by old white men dressed in sandwich boards who must be bored with their lives and the misguided sisters they've convinced to congregate with the hate disguised as religious righteousness? The women who come in here are only trying to make the best decisions they can for their life right now, after maybe making not so great ones, or maybe they had no say in the decision-making process at all. You never know. never really need to, because you've got your own body to worry about. Let them handle theirs. How come police don't care to protect living bodies? Sometimes they do take a pause, but always break their promise of ever coming back. When I know they roam around downtown frequently. How they love to hang around my old store just to make sure that the natives whose land we get fat off of, like keeping warm with the clothes that were stolen right off of their backs, aren't stealing from the store. The police claim to be settling the score, but what about the stolen land that the settlers explored? I'm sure the multi-billion-dollar corporation isn't going to miss a bag of chips or a sandwich. So I ask, who are the police being paid to protect? And who or what is enforcing the task?
Fuck 12, fuck 12, for real, for real. Fuck 12, fuck 12, for real, for real. Fuck 12, fuck 12, for real, for real. Fuck 12, fuck 12, for real. Fuck 12, fuck 12, for real, for real. Fuck 12. Fuck 12, for real, for real. Fuck 12, fuck 12, for real, for real. Fuck 12, fuck 12, for real.
Hi, folks. Thank you. We're back. Before I give the floor to Muna and Maya to take it, I will just make a quick note on the other panels. And before introducing the video, I'm gonna just a quick note in the other panels. We heard that there's a lot of gaps. We heard there's gaps, lack of resources. I just want to highlight that for me, those gaps exist because of how racial capitalism, how white supremacy, how colonialism, and how these harmful and oppressive systems organize the world. And I want to highlight how these systems are enforced by the police, by the courts, by the RCMP, by the CBSA, by all these structures that we have to dismantle together. The recording that we're going to have up next is from Jason, who's incarcerated in jail here on Turtle Island. And he has a very powerful testimony to share with us. And I just want to make sure to warn folks, it has little accounts of violence, state violence, of colonial violence. It is not extremely graphic. However, for folks that cannot tolerate that, I suggest that you wait until after the recording.
My name is Jason, and I'm originally from Kenora, Ontario. I'm 40 years old. I've been in the justice system since I was 15. My grandparents and my parents are residential school survivors. I think, I was involved with the system with CAS2 at a young age, at 9, but they finally gave up on me because I always escaped from there. But growing up in my time out west, if you can't too, you can Google Kenora, the police violence out there in Treaty 3 against Native people, the missing people. Like there was times that one winter I was dropped off. I was driven out way out in the boonies somewhere. I think it was almost 15 miles, 20 miles outside of the community, out in the middle of nowhere. This happened, I think, in the 2000s. I think it was 2002 or 3. But I was left out in the bush. I knew how to survive. I knew my surviving techniques. I was taught that at a young age because that's what my parents endorsed in me when I was young. Is because I was an indigenous person, because I was First Nation. That I'm gonna have a hard time. I'm gonna have a hard time growing up. So that's where they taught me how to, those survival techniques. How to be left out in the bush. How to not to be, hungry and stuff like that. So that's at a young age. I seen a lot of violence with my mom, police brutality, RCMP, OPP back home. I've seen my mom get beaten up. I seen my mom tasered. I seen my mom literally beaten up by numerous times growing up. I've seen that, and I've experienced that as well growing up with police. The system is like when I grew up, like I would get charged like for things that I didn't even do. Going down the street, growing up being Native. There are a couple of times where I was charged on my record for weapons that I didn't even have, or just say like I was in the neighborhood and a beanie happened or some store got broken into. If I was walking down the street, I was the one that would get charged. My name is Jason, and in Native culture, and I've noticed that with post-traumatic stress, we act from our hurt, like the hurt that is done to us. That we have a bunch of these flashbacks sometimes, and just to let that person be for a time being. Like if that person, usually we can calm down ourselves, but if we have somebody talking, like a social worker or somebody they develop the relationship with, can come and talk to this person before the cops come in there and tase them and beat them up, or you know what I mean? Yeah. Something. Mm-hmm. But not all people are violent. Like we all experience. Like sometimes, for me, I'm all talking about my own experiences. That I'm always like, for my post-traumatic, I get trapped in those moments where something happened to me when I was 8 or 9. I get trapped in that. Or when I see the police, the post-traumatic from the police, where they you know what I mean? They're too overly aggressive with me when I get arrested, pointing in the guns, the you know what I mean? The violence, the you know what I mean?
Thank you very much, folks. I'll leave the floor to Muna.
Thank you, Souheil. I'm grateful that we were able to hear from Jason and just what he speaks about in terms of like the history of racial systemic violence from multiple systems, CAS, the police. I think paints such a clear picture for me when it comes to the ways that we speak about abolishing prisons and the police, and the ways that work to address systemic racism is so big. Like it exists in every single settler created racist system that is in this country and beyond. And something that Ollie said in the last panel about how this work is lifelong, a lifelong commitment. I believe so deeply in that, and I feel so connected to what Ollie was sharing. And I actually think that this work is also generational. And is about the ways that we teach our children, and the ways that we honor and think of and center our decision making in our elders and the roles that they play in our communities. I want to just say that so my name is Mona. I'm a Black Muslim woman organizing on unceded Algonquin territory. This is home for me in many ways. I feel really rooted in my ancestral lineage and the lessons that I've taken specifically from my maternal lineage. I'm a police abolitionist and have been working to support families and victims of police violence in the city, specifically Black families and victims of police violence in the city for about 5 years now. I feel called to share because I can hear my grandma and my mom chattering downstairs. Also just about like the ways we actually really need to remember or commit to dismantling the thing within us that says that our elders don't hold knowledge and that our elders are disposable in our communities. And how I think neoliberalism tells us that we are sufficient as individuals and we are all we need, but that our elders hold so much wisdom and what it means to recenter in the ways that our communities have been dealing with conflict and mediating for years. And in the same ways that I go to my grandmother for advice and guidance, I think our communities need to turn to our elders for direction to realign us with purpose when it comes to abolition work, and to really like generate new systems of mediation and moving through conflict that center elders as decision makers in our communities as well. I have the privilege of co-mediating this next panel with some fantastic organizers and community members in the city with Mia. And so I wanted to just turn it over to Mia to introduce herself and speak a little bit about how we plan to hold the space for this panel.
Hi, my name is Mia. I'm a youth climate activist. I also do a lot of work with Indigenous solidarity and organizing in Ottawa. For this panel, I don't want to take up too much space for myself because the voices that need to be heard are the panelists, and I want to create that space for them because I am Armenian, so I do have a heritage, a lineage that survived genocide and lived through oppression, but I'm also very white in my lineage as well. So I want to hold space for people who have felt oppression to them personally on a daily basis and have that trauma deeply rooted in their ancestry. So I wanted the way that we're going to be holding this panel is prior to the panel starting, the organizers sent out a list of 10 questions or topics to address during the panel. And because we have such a short time frame for the panel, I want to make sure that each panelist gets to address the topics or questions that they feel they need to be addressed and they need to speak to. And so I'm going to introduce some of the panelists, and then I'll open the floor to those panelists in turn to address what they feel needs to be addressed first. And then Muna will introduce the rest of the panelists and open the floor to them in turn. And then when we have time at the end, if we have time in the end, we'll go back to those questions and we'll ask the ones that we feel that haven't been addressed, and we'll just try to get through as many as possible. I will be keeping time so that we make sure that each person gets a chance to speak. So we'll give like 5 to 8 minutes, and I'll kind of just wave my hand to give you like a 1 minute kind of heads up. All right. So the panelists that I'm going to introduce are Sabrina. Is Sabrina on this chat? I can't seem to find her name, but Sabrina from Ottawa Carleton District School Board and Planned Parenthood. Then there's Laelem from Produced by Youth. I'm very sorry if I'm mispronouncing names. And Vanessa from Ottawa Black Diaspora Coalition. So I will open the floor to Sabrina to speak to any topic or question that was brought up by the organizers. Is Sabrina here? All right, we'll go back. I'll come back to them. I'll then move on to Laelem.
Hello, everyone. It's pronounced Laelem. Yeah. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak. I gave some thought and took some notes here. I'll just kind of focus on the things that I think I might be able to offer, like, my own perspective on, and then if there's opportunity later on, I'll chime in again. I think when thinking about an alternative to policing, one of the things that strikes me as being something we have to include in the conversation is the fact that like our communities and the marginalized communities that are affected the most by policing, which we are trying to make an alternative to, are often very diverse. And so I think the solution itself has to be diverse. I don't know that there's going to be kind of a one size fits all approach to making an alternative to policing. And I think we have to be okay with like being malleable and flexible to that. That's just kind of something, as I reflect, that seems to be something that's important to think about. So I don't think there's going to be a one size fits all solution, but I think when it comes to like individual kind of communities or subgroups of the community, whether that's like a geospatial or like a land-based kind of subset of our larger community, I think we have to think about ways to consider like the different nuances among communities, the different issues and needs that like arise in the communities when there's some kind of conflict or when there's a need for like a third sort of party volunteer or participant to come in and help mediate. Another thing that I want to also mention is that this is I think it might go without saying, but I think it's important that as we do this work of imagining, we think about like distinctly the ways that the state inflicts violence and trauma on us through policing, to make sure that we don't inadvertently replicate that harm through a system that's supposed to do the opposite of that, or that's supposed to be an alternative to that. And I think that can happen like very subtly, insidiously. It can happen like in the way that the people who are called to respond, like address the people in the way that they, sort of speak to them regarding like their identity, the way they kind of carry themselves and interact with the community, I think is going to be something that like when, this kind of gets fleshed out is going to be really important. Kind of to go back to what Munu was saying, I think we need like community buy-in, but I think because of the fact that our communities are so diverse across sort of age, I think we need like intergenerational buy-in. Like we need the elders to buy in to that. We need to make sure that the conversation we're happening and the decisions we're trying to make are actually accessible to everyone, including the elders of our communities. And I think that might, I think without a doubt, that's going to look like making sure that like the language is accessible, that the materials are, translated for non-English speakers, for non-French speakers, particularly for first and second generation immigrants. I think another thing that I think is important to consider in this conversation is the thinking about safety. So going back to those earlier questions about how we would define what safety is and what it means to be safe, and therefore what it means to feel unsafe. I think one thing that sticks out to me, to use a personal example of an interaction with police, is this idea of being allowed to be a victim in a situation in which you're victimized. So in one instance where the police were called to help with a situation that I was involved in, the police actually escalated the situation. And not only did they escalate it, but they actually put me in harm's way. And not only did they put me in harm's way, but there was no sense of care, no sense of, you have experienced this kind of wrongdoing, wrong has been done unto you, and we recognize that. If anything, like the way in which I was put in harm's way was to kind of do the police's job by kind of watching the person who entered into my apartment. And so like kind of to make it a little bit more clear, it was a sort of a break-in situation. The police were called in, and I was kind of put in harm's way by guarding essentially the person who had broken into my apartment. And I think there is a feeling of, in this idea of like safety, of knowing that, you are not responsible for handling the situation when harm has been done to you. You actually need to be taken care of. And I think, racism has a way of stripping people's humanity from them. It has a way of stripping away their victimhood from them and actually making them responsible, even though they are victims. And I think that's kind of an important thing to consider when we're thinking about an alternative to policing and to, us seeking mediation or someone to kind of interact when there's a conflict or when there's a situation like a break-in or something like that. And then I think if I could just kind of piece it together or wrap it up, it would be that I think I don't imagine that an alternative, that like a community-led alternative to policing is going to be done perfectly the first time. I think there has to be a willingness to say we're going to actually make mistakes and stumble along the way, but we have to make sure that the fear of those mistakes and the fear of that potential harm doesn't paralyze us from taking action or doesn't keep us in inaction, because the alternative to an alternative to policing is policing, and the way that policing works and the way that state violence works is, it's deadly. It isn't. It strips our life away and it chokes the life out of our family and friends and community. And so I think it's super important that we're having this conversation, but also that we don't shy away from imagining things and actually starting to do things, even if we don't always know what it's going to look like or the best way to approach it. I think the fact that we're doing it is really important. So I think I'll leave it with that.
Thank you very much, Laelem, and sorry for mispronouncing your name at first.
No problem.
Sorry, I've got the wrong tab open. So that was really well said, and that was really helpful to the discussion. So I think the next one is Vanessa from Ottawa Black Diaspora Coalition. So same thing, just address what you feel needs to be addressed from the 10 questions or topics that was introduced or given by the organizers. And yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm very slow moving tired today, and I think it's because of the rain. So if I sound very it's just the mood that I'm in for today. But I think one of the questions that an overall theme I think is really important to talk about is community care, especially in Ottawa, and what that could potentially look like. And I think some things that we have to discuss in order to be able to have real good, productive conversations around alternative policing, and definitely around defunding the police. And so things that I have been in discussion with a lot of different folks in the past couple of weeks have been around the way in which Ottawa is a very separate community based off of different things. And so it could be based off of culture or religion, whatever, that Ottawa is very separate. And so we have a lot of different organizers that work towards dealing with anti-racism work, but there's not a lot of unity when it comes to those discussions about what that could look like. And I appreciate this conversation today because I think that's a very important step to start. I think that when we're talking about community care, one thing that's really important that I believe Muna had mentioned is around including elders. I think that it's very important to go back to the fact that we need to make this an intergenerational conversation, including our elders, including youth, including children in these conversations as well. And the reason why I say that is because I'm a mom of a 10-year-old, and I think that there's a lot to say about the fact that youth today are very aware about what's going on in this world and don't have a big opportunity to be able to speak on that and to be able to basically discuss the things that they would like to see being addressed in regards to how they're dealt with. And so just allowing for youth and children to be able to have a voice in this movement for me is a very, very important, huge thing. And I think that when it comes to talking about ways in which to move forward with community care, specifically in Ottawa, I really want folks to have I really think that there needs to be a conversation where we're looking at ourselves and kind of question ourselves as people who are very invested in this work about what are we doing to ensure that people feel safer around us, around how we organize, around things that we want to put on. And I'm saying this because in a lot of the conversations that I've had, there has been a lot of talk about how people specifically, yes, they endure violence from the police, and they endure violence from a lot of different institutions in Ottawa. But a lot of people also endure great violence within their own communities, within people who look like them. And I think that that's something that I think we need to sit with ourselves and ask ourselves, why is that? I know a lot of people who feel a lot of great people who want to be involved, who just don't feel like they can be involved in this type of movement or feel included in this movement because they feel as though they will be shamed, or that they already have like this type of stigma behind their name about, about who they are. And so they just don't want to be, asserting themselves in these types of conversations or this movement. And it's a very real thing that I think is really hard for a lot of people to speak about because, there are bigger things that we want to discuss. And I think that when we're talking about community care, we need to find ways in which we are handling each other with compassion. And if we're talking about alternative ways to policing, that needs to be, I personally believe that's the biggest part of it, is to find ways in order to be compassionate with one another and still find ways to keep each other accountable, but being compassionate within that and not resorting to this type of, basically what the police state does today, which is essentially criminalizing people, demonizing people, and creating stereotypes and stigmas around people for things that maybe folks need to learn from or get education around or get more support and resources and help from. And I think that that's something that I would hope is not a thing that community organizers and community-led initiatives would reinforce. And so that to me is just a very big piece. I really think that is something that I've been hearing a lot from different people about how can the Ottawa community come together in a way where we can have productive conversations and real conversations about how we organize together to create safer spaces for each other. And I think that once we can start to have real conversations about that and break down what that looks like, then I think that we can have a real shot at doing some great community-led work here in Ottawa and around the city to be able to provide resources to folks who need it the most. And I'll just keep it at that for now.
Thank you. I also want to bring that back to indigenous peoples and how they use their teachings and how they have their security. One of my good personal friends, she's indigenous, and one thing that she always talks about when she speaks about the state is how within indigenous communities they didn't have a set policing for their own communities. They had their warriors and they had their healers, but they didn't have a set police force for within their communities. What they had was healing. If there was one person who was a problem or created tension within the community, they would connect them with their elders, they would connect them with their lands, they would connect them with their teachings, they would bring them through a lot of healing. And instead of just going over and excluding them from the rest of the community, they would go through these healing processes and they would go through these teachings. And the last resort, and the very, very last resort, was to then, exclude them from the community because they weren't healthy. They weren't contributing to the community in a healthy way, and they were quite dangerous to themselves and to the community. And so, just that teaching of that being in our culture and being something that is passed down from generation to generation, where it's not, the first resort is not to demonize and criminalize, and it's to learn and heal, bring that back to how we deal with these cases and how we deal within our communities. So I don't see Sabrina anywhere. And so I think I'll pass it on to you, Muna, to introduce the rest of the panelists.
Yeah, for sure. If I could just quickly reflect back the way Laelem and Vanessa spoke to two things that it just felt like it really clicked for me. So Laelem, when you spoke to that specific incident in your own home and when you had called the police, there's something about where in that moment I understood the connection between the work of dismantling and abolition and the work of like dreaming up alternative futures and alternative structures for policing. Because it's like, it's not just that policing is no longer working for us. Police are instigators, they're escalators, they cause violence. And so they continue to cause harm. And so the folks that are in our communities that are working towards defunding, dismantling, abolishing, are just as important, and if not completely intertwined with the people who are dreaming up alternative futures for policing and in this moment creating alternative futures for policing. And so that connection between like the dismantling and the destruction of this system and the dreaming of another one just felt like it really connected for me in that moment, Laelem. So I have gratitude for that. And then Vanessa, just how you speak about like the ways that we've internalized criminalizing each other, and that cycle of like shame that then leads to like disposing of others without us being able to move in a process of accountability that requires for us to practice humility, to practice compassion and care, and then there being this stigma and this exiling of a person or people from our organizing spaces is something that you're noticing in Ottawa, and something that we really need to address. And that unifying work that you've been doing in the city, to me, just speaks to, I think when I say that it's like lifelong work and generational work, it's that like ego work, and it's the work of like recentering in our like vulnerability and humbleness and humility as human beings that are trying to do this work together. So just a lot of gratitude to you folks. I want to take a second to just introduce Terhas and Roksana, who are two final speakers for this panel, and wanted to give you both some time to share what you had prepared to share. If you want to build off what others have shared, that's totally up to you, but just give you that kind of 5 to 8 minutes to share whatever you'd like. So Terhas, I don't know if you wanted to go first.
Sure, yeah. Thank you for that. It's just been really great listening to everybody talk, and I feel fortunate that I get to kind of go at the end because I get to reflect on other people's thoughts. I wanted to say something, Mia, because you were touching on sort of traditional knowledge. And, I think back to my own community, and I'm Eritrean. And, I think about sort of the histories and what my parents have told me and passed down to me about what community was like before policing, right? Because policing was very much introduced in the Eritrean context through the Italian colonial state. And, how conflict was managed, and the ways in which the community would come together to resolve. And I just think it goes back to sort of what Muna has been saying and what others have been saying around making sure that our elders and that we have various generations here, because there's so much traditional and cultural knowledge that we can learn from both the Indigenous folks who have been here for millennia, and from our diaspora communities here in Ottawa as well. So I just wanted to say that before touching in on sort of what I wanted to share in this forum, which is that when I think about safety and safe communities, I think about the ways in which we deal with harm. And some of that harm happens, in public. Our communities are made aware of it. It's brought to light. It happens with witnesses. It's filmed, or we know about it in some way. But a lot of the harm we see in our communities is actually hidden or tucked away for many reasons. It's sort of like that shame that Vanessa was talking about. And so when I think of safety, I think about a community that is first and foremost concerned with preventing harm by investing in preventative measures, but secondly, prepared to sort of address all kinds of harms once they happen, and acknowledging and being compassionate, again, as Vanessa said, and leveraging our skills and our traditional and cultural knowledge to deal with it in a very compassionate way. And so on the flip side of that, what makes me feel unsafe is having to hide or tuck away the harm that's happened to me or my community, because we feel like there's nowhere to turn, whether that's interpersonal harm or police violence. So when I think about the examples, for myself of interacting with the police and trying to seek justice when something very wrong happened to me or my community, I think about the traumatic incident itself and how people were put in harm's way, like Laelem was sharing. But I also think about the trauma that followed, the year-long process of trying to go through administrative processes to try and get justice, and how deflating and how discouraging that was for somebody who, like me, who's very fortunate to be well educated, and the people around me, and feeling like I failed because I wasn't able to navigate the system. And I think that example is so illustrative of what many people in our community feel, which is that sometimes more harm is done by trying to seek justice and resolution in our current systems than simply like tucking it or hiding that harm away. And that's what makes me feel very unsafe for myself and for my community, that so much of what's happening, we feel we need to hide because we're ashamed about, you know, how it happened, or we don't feel like there's going to be any kind of justice that comes out of it. So, you know, just to kind of pivot and talk a little bit about the community-led alternatives, I think community-led alternatives to policing need to really focus on, of course, root causes of crime. And so, you know, we've touched upon it in the previous panel, things like housing, anti-violence, trauma services, school supports, after-school programs. And the good thing is, I think that there's so much out there to deal with harm once it happens. I think that there's a lot of communities, and folks have mentioned some folks happening in the Bay Area and Minnesota, and I think there's lots of really great people and resources that we can learn from. But as far as accountability is concerned, I think what's been on my heart a lot lately is I really feel that we need to do a better job of centering sort of Ottawa and our distinct voice and experience throughout. You know, I've seen a lot of great organizing happening in our city, and I am just in awe of the incredible organizers and the work that's been happening. Sometimes, though, I see like stats and figures and, you know, an over-reliance on things happening, for example, in Toronto or in other cities. And I think we do a disservice to ourselves when we don't go the extra mile to focus on the Ottawa experience. And someone else mentioned this previously, and I understand that it's not a monolith. There's very distinct experiences in Ottawa, but that's just it. I think we really need to do the extra work to sort of come at that Ottawa experience for those various communities. You know, there's already a commonly held belief out there that Ottawa is simply a government town. And while no one denies that Ottawa has a large percentage of public servants, I don't think we realize how much of a trope, like how harmful that trope is, and how much it erases the lived experience of people like myself who grew up here, who grew up in Ramsey and Ritchie and Penny and Harringate and Vanier, you name it. You know, it's these neighborhoods that are over-policed. And we need to be accountable to these communities and really make sure that we're understanding what's happening here in our own city when we build out those solutions. So I think I'm just going to stop there because I think that's sort of what I wanted to highlight on. And again, I thank you for this forum. It's incredible.
Thank you so much. Yeah, what you're saying about like our reliance on like research outside of the city just really spoke to me. So yeah, I also deeply believe in our need to like focus in on the communities that are harmed here as organizers as well. Roksana, are you on the line with us? Did you want to take a second to, or 5 minutes actually or so, to share what you wanted to with the forum and with the group? The floor is yours.
Hi everyone, my name is Roksana. I am a stateless Roma LGBT person living with no status here in Canada for 23 years. And the first thing I would like to say is that since the topic of discussion is systematic racism and abolishing the police, I would like to acknowledge the fact that Roma people have been historically persecuted for centuries. That Roma people have been they went through genocide 75 years ago, and the fact that my mother faces potential deportation to a country that in the year 2018 celebrated Adolf Hitler's birthday, and the fact that there is evidence and proof and data collected about the history and the continued occurrence between Roma people and police. They're being beaten when a Roma person calls for help. They aren't getting acknowledged. They aren't getting the help they need. We continue to be marginalized and excluded from society. We aren't able to have jobs. We're not allowed to live in good homes. We aren't allowed jobs. We aren't allowed anything. And, we live in poverty. And I would like to say that Roma people, we don't have a national homeland. My ancestors lived off the land, just like the indigenous communities. That's why I connect with them a lot. And my flag is nowhere to be seen or found in any governmental buildings. And since we're on the topic about inclusion, I would like for everyone to understand the fact that, you know, people living with no status face the same situations as everybody else. And when we talk about the indigenous and Black communities, I hope that we could now include Roma people, because the Black and indigenous communities, they were enslaved and they've gone through centuries of genocide, and so did the Roma people. And when Souheil invited me to this panel and I registered, the feeling that I got from just reading the registration form and the word Roma appeared, it brought so much joy and happiness to my heart, the fact that I finally feel included. And, you know, people living with no... Hello? Hello?
We can still hear you.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And the fact that, you know, Roma people living here with no status, they experience the same thing. And I hope that since, you know, we are talking about systematic racism, that, you know, people living with no status also are included, and we start raising our voices and protecting Roma people. Now, you know, my father was deported last year. My mother could face potential deportation to no fault of her own, things that were simply out of her hands. Now, you know, this is just a situation that truly breaks my heart, and it saddens me, because I'll say something. In 2012, Jason Kenney, a former minister of immigration, said some not so nice things about Roma people. And he recently said something about the indigenous communities. And I think it is time that when we talk about marginalized people, that we include Roma people. And we also include people living with no status, because here in Ottawa, I've gone to different groups, different coalitions, groups and organizations here in Ottawa, and there is no particular safe space for me to amplify my voice, for me to speak for those who are afraid to speak out. And I mean, you if the folks who are listening can research this for themselves, people who face deportation, they have never in the history, in the Canadian history, no one has ever spoken out as many times as I have. And so when I tell my story to people, I'm speaking for those who are afraid to speak out. Now, here in Canada, my family and I have had a chance to live anonymously here in Canada. But ever since I've spoken out, I've received nasty hate comments. And some of it's even on my social media. And I leave it there for people to see, because people need to understand that Roma people, we don't have a voice. Even just last year in the city of Ottawa, I made history. It was the first ever Roma rally held in the city of Ottawa. And I will continue to do so as long as I am on Canadian soil. And so I just kindly ask for Roma people to be included when they talk about marginalized communities, and for the fact that if we talk about systematic racism, that we also include Roma people and people living with no status, because we truly have no voice. And we need, I'm hoping that the people that will listen will take their own action and will create a safe space so that people could speak either anonymously or they could speak out right in the open. And, you know, it breaks my heart to see that the thing that happened, the situation that happened with George Floyd, you know, it riled up the entire world. Every single state, different countries, far and wide, you know, have taken action for positive change. And even though there has been data collected and video evidence about, you know, police brutality, the same thing is happening in Europe. Roma people are the number one minority that are being discriminated and persecuted and marginalized, and Roma people are the largest minority, but no one is speaking out. So if we can condemn what's happening in the United States, if we can condemn what is happening in different parts of the world, I ask that you also include Europe, and we also put a stop to the hatred and the continued persecution and hate towards Roma people and people living with no status. because things are simply out of our control, and it's a case-by-case situation. And so people don't need to know my full story to know that I'm struggling, to know that I'm in pain. And there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of people just like me. And so it breaks my heart to see that situations, they have to go trending in order for people to take action. That's something that I have really paid close attention to. And so I hope that it will change, and that we could all unite and make positive change together. Because my story has been out there for a full year now, and I haven't got the proper attention. I haven't got the proper help that I need. And what happens if my family will be separated and divided in 3 different countries, in 2 different continents? Who will be there for my well-being? I am a human being, and I am your neighbor. I am your friend. I am the kind of person to take the shirt off my back and help. And that is why my mother, my sister, and myself have made over 1,300 masks that have gone all across the eastern hospitals. They have gone to local retirement homes, given out to staff and residents. And we are good people, and we are saving lives. And I think it's time for Canada to step in and save my mother's life. She's a 60-year-old woman with severe mental health issues. And now just imagine the trauma of a family member, of people. Imagine the trauma that a person and family members go through deportation. I nearly lost my mother to suicide if I didn't step in and save her life. My sister was anorexic. My sister split her wrist. It's a very, very traumatizing situation. And I hope that people here in Ottawa, different coalitions, will unite with me. And ultimately, we are fighting for the same purpose, regardless of our religion, regardless of our identity, regardless of our ethnic backgrounds, regardless of everything. We all have differences, and that is what makes us unique. But we all have a similar pain. We all go through similar traumas. We have gone through similar things that our elders have gone through for generations. And I think that it's time to include Roma people, and it's time to include people living with no status, because we are truly the lost and forgotten people. And I think that, we have to make change, but I alone can't do this by myself. And I ask you all to extend your helping hands and help me. And if there is anything that I could do to help you folks, call me anytime and I will be there. So we have to be there for our neighbors. We have to be there for our communities. Like here in Ottawa, there's different coalitions, and there's nothing that actually unites us. I have searched far and wide. Even I have gone all across the nation, searching for a group or organization that will fight for my cause, and I have not found one yet. And so I hope that my story has touched you folks in a way that you will take your own action. Because at the end of the day, I am not a leader. I'm not brave and courageous for speaking out. I am a person trying to do what I can to keep my family whole, so that I don't live with a lifetime full of regret. Thank you.
Roksana, I want to acknowledge that, I think that when we talk about this work being about sustainability and longevity and about dismantling system, I also want to recognize that there are immediate calls to action, and there are people who are at risk of being deported at any moment. And so there's actually a real sense of urgency around this work. I have a lot of gratitude for you taking up this space to share a very clear call to action about making sure that we remember and that we center and that we speak about the Roma people in our advocacy and our work. I want to also ask, knowing that your mom is facing an immediate or a deportation order, is there a call to action that you have for people regarding your case specifically that we could act on, that we could do? Are there specific ways that you would like for the people who are tuned into this space to support you outside of that call to action that you've shared. I just wanted to give you a few more minutes before we kind of wrap up.
Yes, absolutely. I would love. Yes, hi. Thank you for acknowledging my pain and suffering. Souheil and I are planning to do a call for action, and I would love for you to connect with Souheil, and Souheil will connect you with me, and that we can do something together and make clear to the politicians and all levels of government that this is an urgent case, and that, you know, my mother is still on Canadian soil and she is safe here. And if she goes to another country, her well-being and safety is at great risk. And so thank you for that. I want to cry right now. Thank you so much for that. And just please connect with Souheil, and, you know, we will work together. And I thank you for joining me.
Thank you. I want to just, I have so much gratitude for everyone who was on this panel. I think that it was like a beautifully diverse, like there were beautifully diverse experiences and comments and ideas shared. And I have, I just feel it was such a pleasure and an honor to be able to hold this space with Mia. I just want to pass it over to Mia to say some kind of final words before we wrap up this panel.
Yeah, so while listening to everyone, I took like minimal notes because I really just wanted to take in what everyone was saying. And one thing that really stuck out for me was that the lack of healing and the amount of trauma that has been inflicted in so many communities, and how you know, nobody's making resources for healing, and nobody's making space for people's traumas to be heard and to be reflected on. And you know, as a community, we need to work on making those spaces. And honestly, you all spoke so well that I feel like I can't add something more to what you've all said. And I just want to thank you all very much for speaking and for being present. And thank you for giving me the honor for holding this space for you.
Souheil, did you want to, I don't know if it's you next. I don't have the thing in front of me, but did you want
No, it's good. We can move on to the break so folks can have a break. Thank you so much, everyone, for your words and for these ideas. I'll just go on the break and then we come back after.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone.